Welcome to Mythbusters Reading Edition. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education.
And I'm Lynn Givens from Connect to Comprehension. Comprehension Myth. Answering teachers' questions is an adequate measure of a student's comprehension. This could be maybe not so much of a myth if teachers ask lots of different kinds of questions. If they ask questions that require inferential thinking skills and evaluative thinking skills, and they use Bloom's taxonomy, and they did all that, but we as teachers don't tend to do that. We tend to ask who, what, when, where, maybe why, maybe how, but who, what, when, where, mostly questions. And so because many of us are stuck doing that, and I as a young teacher was just as guilty as everybody else, if we stick to literal questioning, the only kind of thinking that our students will do is literal thinking. So we need to ask higher level questions. And for many of us, we need to practice this. We need to actually teach ourselves to do this so that it becomes more automatic. It wasn't automatic for me. I needed to actually look at passages, think about those levels of questions that I needed to ask, that I needed to get inferential questions, that I needed to get evaluative questions into my questioning. And if you do that, then we're a lot better off in terms of pairing teacher questioning to comprehension. But then we're missing the whole writing element. So we also need to make sure that students are able to answer questions in writing. And for many students who can answer questions orally, asking them, especially our struggling readers, because struggling readers tend to be struggling writers, if we ask them to answer a question in writing, it's very, very difficult for them. I have worked with, I think I've mentioned this before, but I worked with a 28-year-old dyslexic student several years ago. Very, very bright young woman who dropped out of school in 6th grade. She was pretty good about answering once she learned to read, and we used decodable readers. Once she learned how to read a little bit better and convinced herself that she could in fact read, she could answer those upper level questions pretty well. She'd had a lot of life experiences, and she was, as I said, very bright. But when I started asking her to write her answers on paper, that was a whole different story, because she struggled with spelling. She struggled with written sentence structure, with getting the words in the right order on paper. And so what we did for that was use sentence frames. So I started the answer. So if I said, why did the man steal the money? I would write, the man stole the money. She knew that for a why question, she needed because. Mm-hmm. And using those sentence frames with her for a while helped her be able to structure her written expression, which is different than oral expression, as you know. So we need to make sure that we include, when we're asking questions, that we also include how to write the answers to those questions, and that we include questions on the 3 levels, on literal, inferential, and evaluative thinking.
Of course. And I think there's a couple things that brought up even when I was in high school and in university. When you're teaching the subject and you're talking about it in class, you often just do that surface level questioning, and then even the homework assignments, but then on the exams, it's those higher level questionings. And we need to make sure that we include that in our instruction and in our homework so that it prepares the individual for the harder questions in the test. And we, again, as you were saying, teach them how to answer them. And one really easy thing that some people get on their own, but other people have to be taught, is how to rephrase the question into a sentence starter, and just practicing doing that until the individual is comfortable. So if I ask you, who stole the money? You can say, the money was stolen by, and then the answer. And then I think you said, why did the man steal the money? The man
I
stole
don't know why we're stuck on man stealing money today.
exactly. But give the student the opportunity to even just have repeated practice of rephrasing the question in the
Yes.
answer
Yes.
and knowing how to take the question and find what you need to put in the answer. I know when I was taught a strategy for finding the information that you need for a word problem in mathematics. And I think this is an often neglected side of comprehension because, word problems in mathematics, sometimes the hardest thing is getting the information out of the question. So this strategy was, the mnemonic was, if no mother's at home, go to the A and W. If meant information. So in that part, you underlined the important parts of the question. So you knew what the numbers were and what the operations were. No was number operation. So you wrote down the number operation. Mother's at home is where you did the math work. And A and W was answer in words. So it gave you that structured approach
I like it.
to
I like
the
it.
math problem. Yeah. And honestly, so I think I learned this in grade 6 and I used it in my 4th year computer science courses. Right.
Sure.
So teaching this strategy to a young student is something that's going to give them the ability to use it throughout their education and gives them the framing and the structure so they have that. I like calling them schemas that they can apply to the situation.
It's exactly what they are. I think when we're talking about asking questions, the other thing I want to talk about just briefly is it not only matters what questions we're asking, but how we respond to our students. And so if you're asking a student a question and the student raises his hand and answers, and the answer is not quite there, or maybe even wrong, to me, one of the least effective things you can do is say no and call on somebody else, because that student doesn't learn from that experience and he just feels bad that he couldn't get the answer. So the way that you respond to your questions is almost as important as the questions that you ask. So you can respond to that kind of question by acknowledging the part that's right. Yes, you said that, but why do you think? And just start scaffolding, just start asking other questions until you can ask that question and have the students be able to answer. Now, when I say this to teachers, they say, but that's so time consuming. Well, how would you better want to spend your time? helping a student be able to understand the process of answering that question, or having that student just sit there feeling crummy because he didn't get the answer. And when he listens to another student answer, he's not really learning from that. You learn through the process of doing. So I think it's a wonderful way to spend your time. Stick with that student, scaffold once you've asked the question, acknowledge the part of the answer that's right, and ask further questions so that he can get there. And if you practice this enough and you do it with your students enough, it doesn't need to take that much time.
And it's going to help other students in the class.
Exactly.
And something similar to that is when students ask you questions, you can say, you know what, that's a great question. How do you think I would ask that question if it were a test, right? And help them go into that deeper level of questioning. So they might have asked you just a surface question, but then help them take it to that next level, right? And
Yes.
do it coming from what they're interested in, right? And it just teaches them those strategies in a natural, teachable moment.
Right. Those
And
are
teaches
important.
them to be that critical thinker.
Right. And not to be stuck asking and answering literal questions, because if you do that, that's all your students will be able to do. And we know there's so much more to comprehension than that.